I was 23 years old and had recently made manager in a large multinational manufacturing environment. Part of my role at the time involved supporting workforce transition processes. I remember welcoming one gentleman into my office. He was much older than me. I had the paperwork prepared, the transition package, the workforce reintegration support information, everything I needed to walk him through the process. As I started explaining the next steps, he stopped me. In Swahili, he said something I have never forgotten. "My daughter, I understand what you are saying, but I have worked here my entire life. What exactly am I supposed to do now?" What struck me immediately was that he was not really asking me about severance. He was asking something much deeper. He was saying, everything I know I learned here. Everything I built here. Everything I know how to do applies here. What happens now? I remember sitting there realizing something I'd never fully appreciated before. You can spend years building capability and still find yourself vulnerable if your capability only exists within one environment. Organizations change. Industries change. Technology changes. Markets change. And if your expertise cannot travel beyond the walls of one institution or one market, eventually you face a very difficult question. Who are you professionally outside that organization that developed you? That conversation unsettled me. Not because right sizing was unusual, not because organizational change was unusual, but because I realized how many hardworking, capable people had invested decades becoming exceptional within systems without intentionally building distinction beyond those systems. Years later, after leaving employment and building my own companies, I found myself consulting with another major manufacturing organization going through something similar. Different organization, same lesson. I remember speaking to one manager, very capable, very knowledgeable, strong institutional understanding. And he said something I've also never forgotten. He was talking about leaders from other global markets who'd been brought in. Honestly, they're not as qualified as people think. They're just very good at selling themselves. I remember thinking, no, not selling themselves, positioning themselves. There is a difference, because authority is not pretending. Authority is not exaggeration. Authority is not manipulation. Authority is reducing friction between your capability and opportunity. That realization changed how I viewed leadership forever. Decades later, I am still seeing the same pattern among qualified yet overlooked African leaders I work with. CEOs, board leaders, civil servants, political leaders, executive directors, nonprofit leaders, senior public sector leaders, founders, leaders who by most standards have already made it, leaders who carry extraordinary responsibility, leaders who influence industries, policies, economies. They come to me with questions that sound different on the surface, but point to the same underlying issue. Where do I go from here? I have reached the top. I've spent decades in my sector. I know I have more to contribute. I've been laid off. The industry is changing. What's next? How do I stand out when everyone at my level is just as qualified, just as experienced? Suddenly, leaders who have carried decades of expertise start second-guessing themselves. Who am I to the world beyond this title? If I needed to distinguish myself in the marketplace today, could I? Would my expertise travel beyond my organization? Would institutions trust my authority beyond the walls of where I currently work? One of the exercises I sometimes encourage leaders to do is very simple. Open Google, Type your name. Look at what appears, but not as yourself, as someone making a decision about you, a board member, an appointing authority, an institution, a media producer, a conference organizer, an investor, a policymaker, a global organization, a search committee. What expertise immediately becomes visible? What evidence exists that positions you for larger opportunities? What leadership narrative emerges? What authority signals appear? What trust signals appear? What gaps become obvious? Because whether we like it or not, increasingly, people are forming conclusions before they even meet us. Global opportunities open and close before we've had the first conversation. People search, they compare, they evaluate, they verify, and decide. We laugh at memes of LinkedIn notifications that say someone has viewed your profile, but you can't see who. For many, you'll never know either, because they looked at your profile and decided you don't carry the authority they're looking for. So they move on to others that do. African leaders, I know we've been conditioned to work hard, to excel at our jobs, and wait to be rewarded. But the now global, digital, and often AI-first world doesn't work that way. Do your authority signals align with the level at which you aspire to operate now? Have you intentionally built thought leadership? Have you built strategic visibility? Have you built digital assets that distinguish your capability? Do endorsements exist at the level at which you want to be selected? Can your expertise travel globally? The greatest mistakes leaders make is believing capability alone will eventually speak for itself. Increasingly, capability requires architecture. It requires intentional positioning, strategic visibility, authority systems, particularly for African leaders. And I say this with great conviction. Not victimhood, not limitation, conviction. There is nothing inherently special about people who distinguish themselves globally. There is intentionality, positioning, visibility, communication, authority. There are authority signals. I have seen extraordinary African leaders, brilliant, capable, ethical, high-performing, globally competitive, and still hidden. Not because excellence is absent, because authority architecture is absent. People cannot endorse expertise they cannot see. Institutions cannot select value they cannot verify. Markets cannot reward capability they cannot discover. You do not work this hard to become exceptional and remain invisible. You do not spend decades building capability only for changing industries to make you feel irrelevant. You do not reach executive leadership only to realize your expertise exists inside one institution. You do not spend years carrying responsibility, sacrifice, delivery, and leadership only to discover your authority remained accidental rather than intentional. This is why we build Africa Authority Ascent. Because exceptional African leaders deserve authority systems aligned at the level at which they operate. Africa Authority Ascent is our private executive authority advisory designed for African leaders building toward greater influence, greater visibility, greater trust, and greater global relevance. Built around our STAGE framework: strategic positioning, trust architecture, authority assets, global visibility, and endorsement expansion. Because authority is not ego. Authority is reducing friction between your capability and opportunity. Authority is helping institutions trust expertise faster. Authority is helping opportunities find you. Authority is ensuring that decades of contribution do not remain invisible. The question I leave you with today is simple. If opportunities increasingly begin before conversations happen, what does the world currently see when it searches for you? More importantly, what should it see? Now, perhaps as you listen today, something felt uncomfortably familiar. Maybe you realize your expertise exists largely inside your organization. Maybe you realize your authority signals are not yet aligned with the level at which you're capable of operating. Maybe you realize that if someone searched your name today, they would not yet see the full measure of your contribution. And if that is you, I want you to do something simple. DM the word Ascent. ASCENT. Africa Authority Ascent was built for African leaders who know they're capable of greater influence, broader visibility, stronger endorsement, and larger impact. Because capability matters. But increasingly, authority influences whether capability gets selected. If you know there's a gap between the level at which you operate and what the market currently sees, DM Ascent. We'll explore fit, because exceptional African leaders deserve authority systems aligned with the level at which they operate. Thank you for joining me on the Authority Advantage podcast. I'm Modesta Mahiga, and I'll see you next time.